century, or in some cases a little bit later, not to mention the companies, some of which have larger budgets and some national GDPs, also setting net zero. This is certainly the sort of question that we want to be asking. But before we delve into the main topic of the day, I'd like to ask each of our speakers to give their opinion on the list of stories which are showing up on your screen now. It's very much a case of choosing a story that's jumping out at you and flashing neon lights. There's no right answer, there's no right story. It's just what grabs you, really. Katrina Sarada, she is the founder of the SDG Hub, Centre for Sustainable Economies and Innovation. Thank you very much for joining us. And which story is grabbing your attention today?
Thank you, Michelle, for introduction. I pick up key ideas for building a circular economy for plastics. So basically, the topic of plastic is the hot on the agenda, on the policy agenda in the private sector. So the main ideas to improve our treatment of plastic in the economy is basically to eliminate unnecessary and problematic plastic packaging through redesign and innovation, moving from the single use to reuse and other circular economy practices, ensuring that our plastic is basically reusable, recyclable, and compostable, and increasing the reuse, collection, and recycling composting plastic packaging in emerging economies and fastly developing countries where actually recycling is not well equipped, and where required recycled content is not high. This is a matter of the policy. So other plausible input which has been in the air among the politicians and academia is, of course, introducing extended producer liability and responsibility. So we need to have the returnable schemes. The article doesn't focus on the role of the digital technologies, but the role of digital technologies, of the blockchain technologies and other applications is really crucial. It can be useful for shaping the consumption patterns and behavioral schemes of people. So, and of course, increasing the required content of recycling, which is not that high. So globally, we recycle very little plastic, and we need to invest in infrastructure, in facilities, in digital technologies, and introduce extended producer responsibility to make sure that everyone takes care of its own waste.
Absolutely, and we can go into that more, I think, because also that feeds directly obviously into the petrochemical industry, which is a big area for the Middle East. And I'd be keen to hear you use the phrase redesigning innovation, and obviously you touched on the importance of digital and rethinking infrastructure as well. And I think you can certainly go into that a little bit more in the bulk of our conversation, as there is a lot to say there. Ashley Taylor, thank you very much for joining us. Ashley is the Managing Director of Net Zero Middle East. Ashley, which story is grabbing you, please?
Yeah, the one that sort of caught my eye was Australia's gearing up to issue credits for carbon capture. I thought this was quite interesting, one, because my company is very heavily on the carbon credit side of things, but also just that Australia have been quite controversial as of late with their gas and coal future programs, and the fact that they've not set a net zero target yet. But the fact that they're looking to issue carbon credits associated with carbon capture is a good thing. It's just, there'll still be a heightened level of, controversy over it.
It's certainly a change of tone, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a softening for sure. But as I said, the fact that, yes, they're generating liquefied natural gas and hydrogen and capturing carbon dioxide is a good thing. The use of coal and gas as a primary is probably one that's not.
Hi, Michelle. Sorry to interrupt, but Cohen is in.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much, Irene. Yes, actually, I think that was very well put. The seesaw is still not quite in balance. Cohen, thank you very much for joining us. Cohen is the Managing Director at Trinomics, and we've just been chatting about the story on the top 10 list that grabbed Ashley and Katrina's attention. Would you like to choose a story that you think is particularly key right now?
Oh, but there are so many different interesting
I know.
stories. So I'm just out of a call with the Indonesian government on their roadmap 2030. And yeah, many of these elements are touching on that. So we had a discussion on what is the cost of fossil fuels, for example, compared to renewable energies. So if you have to take a decision, I think what is quite interesting to see is how the current coal and especially gas prices and electricity prices are increasing currently, and the impact on the European markets, because this is basically currently a high policy issue at EU level, but also at the member states level. I think this is one of the key elements that we are discussing currently at the EU level, and you see that this is a discussion in quite a lot of member states and the parliaments. So how they have to interfere, how they can deal with decreasing or flattening this kind of curves. So you have to know that the prices in Europe over the last month increased by 30, 40, 50%. So, and you have to know that if the cost of gas, for example, per megawatt hour is increasing from 20, 30 euros per megawatt hour to more than 40, 50, 60, 70 even today. So this is huge. This is huge. We are now talking about wholesale prices, and that people also understand that the impact for the final consumer is even much higher due to the fact that the transmission, distribution, and taxes are 75% of your prices in Europe.
Yeah.
Which means that an electricity price, the wholesale price was about 40, 50 euros per megawatt hour, and the final price for the customer was more than 200. Yeah, so this is a little bit the setup in Europe that people understand, where you see now that the forward prices are going beyond 200 euros per megawatt hour, which is insane. Yeah, so we haven't seen this in whole history, that forward prices were increasing so heavily in such a short time frame. And this is, I think, a very interesting topic, how we have to deal with it, with the liberalization of the energy markets in quite a lot of countries, and how these kind of elements have a political impact, and how we can deal with it in the near future to flattening this kind of peaks that we have seen.
And inserting that level of stabilization as well, essentially, is what we're talking about, and perhaps a circular economy and much greater clarity in education and visibility on policies and principles as well can start to help that. So we're just going to dive into the main topic of the day, a circular economy. What's next? It's obviously far too big a question for us to answer in the next 20 minutes, but we're certainly going to touch on it a little bit. So just for our listeners, I'll briefly explain what a circular carbon economy is as a framework. It's for managing and reducing emissions, which we're talking about the carbon economy side. And it's a closed loop system involving 4 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle, remove, as we've touched on already. This, as Katrina mentioned, this is described by Aramco, with Saudi Arabia choosing to put a big spotlight on CE principles during its presidency at G20 last year. Now, as is often the case with these big spotlights, what happens when they get pivoted somewhere else? What's the work going on in the background when the spotlight isn't being shone on these key issues? And that's also something we'll go into shortly. It's obviously something we really need to be talking about. It's more than 100 billion tons of resources every year enter the economy: metals, minerals, fossil fuels, organic materials, plants, animals, and 8.6% gets recycled. Katrina said about low recycling rates to do with plastics. It's across the board, unfortunately, and get recycled and used again. And the use of resources has tripled since 1970. Obviously, a lot of us involve very middle-class lifestyles and improved living conditions, and we've had a huge population growth. And this is expected to double again by 2050. So essentially, we need 1.5 Earths to sustain the way we live, and this is nicely put by the World Resources Institute. So that gives a bit of background as to why a circular economy, why we should even be talking about this, why it matters so very much. And it's really not a new idea. It's been going around for a very long time, but it's certainly far more in the spotlight now. Katrina, I'd be keen from your point of view, what's your take on the progress of circular economy principles in the Middle East at the moment? Are you hopeful? Do you think enough is being done?
I consider this question in a wider context of what is happening in the world. First, there is a business imperative to change. As you have just mentioned, we have a problem with our material, carbon, and upstream requirements footprint. There are several reports, one by International Resource Panel and some others also by the important stakeholders, saying that we actually has the deficit in our resources in trade. So the net exporters countries of the resources are diminishing year after year. So it's not really the question of how, whether we should progress, but it's how fast should be the pace. The pace should be fast. As for the region of the Gulf economies, we see the progress. Just I would suggest to go through the study on the circular economy developments in the Gulf economies region and opportunities for collaboration in the European Union. It was issued in April 2021. So there is a nice overview of the developments of the circular economy initiatives in Saudi Arabia, in Arab Emirates, and of course there is a large focus. The same was for European Union. When we started to talk on the circular economy, we started from talking about recycling. Now we moved the paradigm on another level, saying no, we have to move to the level of the design and to reduce our waste in first place, which is a level of design. So I think that the effects that will be produced by the policy of European Green Deal will have a macro and global effect, because the European Union designed this policy as a foreign policy. It would not make any sense to apply Green Deal only to European players, because then there will be the problem of carbon leakage and the lack of the competitiveness. So of course the impact of the transition to circular economy in Europe will be felt globally. European Union tried to reduce the negative impact on other countries by enhancing the collaboration, exchanging the knowledge, building the capacity and investments. So
and there's a lot that the Middle East can learn from the progress that Europe has already made in this space. Like you say, they've been working on it for a very long time, and the Middle East is beginning certainly to pick up its momentum. I mean, in the UAE, the cabinet approved the UAE Circular Economy Policy 2021 to 2031, established the UAE Circular Economy Council. Then this has been very recent. And actually, I'd be keen to know from you, how can the UAE juggle these goals? And of course, there's other lower carbon goals, not net zero, as the title of this session, unfortunately doesn't apply just yet, and being OPEC's third largest producer. Now, this is certainly not to vilify, black gold, albeit a lot less shiny recently, but it's a key part of the UAE's future. But to say, how is this going to balance out? Actually, what are your thoughts? What do you think that this move by the UAE is very meaningful?
I would say,
sorry, Catherine, that was for Ashley, please.
Yes, please.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's incredibly important. I think that what we're not maybe encouraging enough of are governments to play a clear role. They're doing certain things, but legislative stimulus is probably not quite there yet. I don't necessarily see them working with producers, for example, enhancing their responsibility by adding recyclable biomass material into their products. There's not much in the way of market incentives at the moment, and obviously these plans have just been brought in place. There's not enough of producers and importers sharing responsibility for waste management, and the onus really needs to be on the producers to design for the circular economy, i.e. design out waste and pollution. And we need to encourage a little bit more of circular procurement, and I'm not sure that's really happening at the moment. Companies need to consider what will happen to products at the end of life. Can its parts be reused and repurposed to retain that value? And then finally, I just think, and this is where I believe the UAE, having lived here for 15 years, has come on leaps and bounds, but there needs to be a change in consumer behavior.
Yeah.
And importantly, education, and that's education from the age of my little ones at 5 and 6 years old, all the way through to increasing more circular economy related courses at the university level. So great that they're doing things. I think they're, having lived outside in the region for 15 years, I don't see the impetus being, I don't see it really being taken to the next level.
And you mentioned there about needing more market incentives, more pressure on producers, more pressure on when you're looking at procurement to make sure that it is in keeping, at least trying to keep with those circular economy goals. When do you think that sort of momentum is going to start coming through? What sort of timeline would you hope? I know you don't have a crystal ball, so this is very much what you would hope to happen.
Funny, I was at WETEX Dubai Sustainability Show yesterday, and we had I proposed to the panel the similar question. In 5 years' time, where do you think we'll be with this conversation? And I think the idea was that in 5 to 10 years' time, we would have seen a completely different economy. I think that as we'll go on to, I'm sure, discuss, the fossil fuel industry would have helped with that compared to what it's doing at the moment. So I would say 5 to 10 years. Do you think that they have, the fossil fuel industry, I'll come over to you in a moment, Cohen, thank you. Do you think that they have the tools in place to make these positive changes? Do you think that what level are they at? Are they still and obviously, let's look at NOCs, it's probably easier than making it too broad a question. Do you think NOCs have done the education fact side of it? They know what they need to do. Now the next step is implementing it, or do you think there's still a level of education needed to make sure that everyone truly understands how far-reaching as circular economy principles are? The wood on the table that I'm sat against, and the materials and the camera that's in front of me, and the depth of the market that's required to really embrace a circular economy. Do they understand the depth? I think they do. I just think it's always going to take some time, and I think that I think they're trying. I really do. I really do think that. But I think there's a lot more to be done in short. To be honest with you.
Because we certainly see very much that they're trying very hard, and there's some very innovative efforts coming through. And sometimes they say, we've had so many other factors to deal with in the last 2 years that this is one of those things that we're trying to get on with. But at the same time, we're trying to develop our renewable energy, and we're trying to develop our green talent, and we're trying to do this, and we're trying to do that. There's only the speed at which we can move is only so fast. So what we sometimes see is in the upper levels of NOCs is very good understanding, but it hasn't trickled down as far as would be ideal yet, just because the market's been so disruptive.
And all I would say to add to that is that in 5 years ago, I don't believe that ADNOC, for example, would have had a sustainability team. They do now.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Are they looking at decarbonisation? Of course, more on the CCS side of things, and also exploring renewables and hydrogen, etc. But the interesting conversations that we've had is they're actually looking at their Scope 3 emissions. How do they screen their vendors to be in line with their emission reduction aspirations? They're doing those things. So that's the important thing. Obviously Scope 3 is huge.
Oh, I mean, yeah, it's a whole nother ball game completely, Scope 3. But yes, we certainly agree. There's been a lot of progress, and the fact that Aramco put circular economy principles in the spotlight as well. The world's biggest oil exporter doing that, it speaks volumes. Cohen, I just wanted to ask you before we go to our first survey question about circular economy and CCUS and CCS.
Yeah, I wanted to quickly react on your question because there is much more ongoing at EU level than what just mentioned. So the Green Deal started more than 2 years ago. It took a whole year for the Commission basically to get everything on the rails. Over the last 12 months, a lot has been done. So besides the Circular Economy Action Plan, you have all the work done by DG Grow, DG Environment, DG Klima, together with even DG Connect, so digitalization, and also DG Trade and DG Taxud. So these are the most important DGs involved in the SPI. And SPI stands for Sustainable Products Initiative. I'm myself the project director of this initiative for the European Commission, which is a huge project. We are now in the final stage of the impact assessment, and it has a direct link to circular economy, because basically what we are doing, we are setting up new standards for all products, basically for the basic sectors in Europe. And it has an impact on all the trade partners Europe is dealing with, because we are going to set up product passports. And that means that we are not only looking at eco-design as such. Eco-design means that we are looking at the energy intensity of your product. We are looking also at environmental impacts and the social impacts of the product. And that counts for the chemical sector, that counts for the textile sector, that counts for all the sectors you can imagine. And it means that all the products that will be imported in the next coming 5 years, because it will take up to 5 years, we are now at the impact assessment. Next year, it will be implemented into legislation. And then they have to have discussions with all the industrial sectors, like they have been doing with eco-design over the last 20 years. And it takes about 1 to 2 years for every sector, which means that within now and 5 years, we will have already implementation of a lot of new products and related to SPI. So that's one.
Excellent. Cohen, we're going to have to move on because we haven't got very much of the podcast left, unfortunately, and we still have the survey questions I'd like to get your views on. But let's discuss offline, because we'd certainly like to go into those details with you further, and perhaps we can do a separate interview on that. So if you could just hold on that, and we'll revisit it. Thank you very much. Irene, if we could please bring up that first survey question, I'd be really keen to have your opinions. Carbon capture and storage as a solution for achieving get rid of an A. Achieving a circular economy is an expensive distraction, is not at the scale required to be meaningful. It is the golden solution for the energy industry. Ashley, which one would you choose? No judgment.
Middle one.
Okay. If it does get scaled up, as we hear is the plan, do you think it would be then become the golden solution, or do you think it's a solution?
I think it's a solution. Yeah, I'd be very wary of saying the golden solution.
It'd be lovely though, wouldn't it? It'd be wonderful to have a golden solution to anything. Katerina, where do you stand with this?
I would say that it has to be economically feasible. For the moment, it's too expensive, of course. Absolutely. If we manage to get the technologies in place and good incentive, European Union is working on it. I saw some initiatives about that, but for the moment, it's too expensive, yes.
Okay, fantastic. Well, we'll pop back to that later. We've probably got about a minute to wait till we can have the results. Oh, Irene, the results are there already. Irene, can you show the results? I think they popped up.
Hi, Michelle, it's on the screen.
I can't see it. Can you tell me what the result is, please?
So 73% for not at the scale required to be meaningful, and 18% the golden solution, and 9% an expensive distraction.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Irene. Cohen, does that 18% on the golden solution, does that surprise you?
No, it's clearly an issue today in function of economic feasibility. But if you look at the transition process ongoing in different industries, so they do choose this option still. So because for the cement industry, for the certain steel industries, it's the only option to decarbonize totally by 2050. So if you look at the plans of these industries, they choose for CCS, CCU options.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And Katerina, just want to look at the renewables side of energy. We've touched a bit on the fossil fuels, but obviously renewable markets also have to apply circular principles and circular approaches. So managing end-of-life solar PV modules, wind blades, batteries, and these issues are becoming far more prevalent in the conversation. And also they touch a little bit on what you started with, talking about the way we need to better redesign the way we use plastics. And obviously we all know about the war on plastics as it is, but and also at the same time acknowledging that plastics play a critical role in our lives, from medicine to transport to education, however we look at it. So from your point of view, what do you think that there's enough of a focus in the renewables market when it comes to circular principles?
Definitely, circular economy principle assumes that we rely on the local resources. We rely on valorization of our waste, even though from the circular economy perspective, converting waste into energy is the least desired strategy. There are many other strategies how to keep the resource in the economy. So when we come to the transition to the circular economy, it's rather localization of the energy supply exactly because of the reliance on the solar and wind, so sourcing it locally. And with European Union, it was already estimated how much resources we need in order to fulfill the needs of the energy transition. And in order to keep the access to the critical materials which are needed to build the panels, and you know that the big part of the energy transition in the European Union is actually electrification. So here comes also the use of the batteries. So for this critical value chain, the European Union has developed separate strategies to introduce circularity. The progress was lagging behind till this year for the wind turbines, but the European Union is working on it in order to solve the problem.
Katrina,
Wait.
sorry, I'm not sure about Cohen and Ashley, but I can't hear you, I'm afraid. The audio's taken a bit of a dip, so I'm just going to pop over to Ashley, and I'll come back to you, and hopefully by then we can hear each other a little bit more clearly. Just before we go to the next survey question, please, Ashley, I'd like to take that question over to you as well. Obviously, the Middle East is really pushing ahead with renewables. We've got some of the world's biggest solar projects. We've got ambitions for lots of other renewable projects, you know, wind as well. It's ramping up, and there's a scale factor there too. So from your perspective, how are renewable energy development companies dealing with the future waste of the raw materials needed to develop these markets?
I think the waste from end of life clean energy infrastructure will be growing. I think they said 30 times, factor of 30 times over the next 10 years. So
wow,
significant opportunities. But obviously recovering those sort of materials and reintroducing them is pretty complex from logistics point of view. So high volumes, material in remote locations, hazardous substances as well. Pretty problematic, but the good news is that a lot of that waste is obviously can be recycled in established systems, so steel, glass, aluminium, I guess. I do have some worries, though. I would say that the region, do we have the capacity here and technologies to recycle the waste? Perhaps given the long service life of solar PV and batteries and wind blades, we've probably got time to get those facilities in place, but are ecological and climate benefits of using those materials fully accounted for in the costs of the materials, i.e., are the recycled secondary materials, they'll have to compete on price with primary materials that are often cheaper. So I think there's a long way to go. I don't think we're even touching on the potential huge amount of waste to come from these excellent solar farms and what have you that are springing up around the Gulf.
Indeed, and they are absolutely excellent, and perhaps this is going to be needs to be a key focus area going forward. Like the time frame that you gave up wasn't very long really, and 30-fold is huge. Researchers say the circular economy risks becoming counterproductive unless we stop referring to it as a panacea for all environmental problems. Do you agree or disagree? I've heard this too. If we get a circular economy going, everything will be absolutely fine and everything will be completely fixed. And our point of view is that it's going to resolve huge amounts, and that we can't continue as a healthy planet and healthy ecosystems, not just for humans, but everybody else who lives on the planet as well, without it. But it's not the the absolute be all and end all. That just happens to be our opinion. I'd be keen to hear yours as well. Cohen, where would you stand on this, please?
Yeah, I disagreed. So we are ourselves researchers, and I can tell you the research I'm reading, and also we have our own circular economy unit within Turner. So all the research we are doing is going to a different direction. So of course, we are at the beginning stage. There is still a lot to restructure. Regulation has to be set up. Waste streams have to be set up. Ashley said waste is indeed important. In my opinion, after also having discussions with some ports in Europe, waste has to become a commodity. And this is, I think, also very important for the Middle East. So where do you set up these commodity waste hubs what will be the pricing system for it? How are you going to recycle them? And so on and so on. And so there are still a lot of questions, but it doesn't mean that it will be the other way around. So that's why I disagreed.
Well, it sounds very much like the outlook. We're going to have to wrap up now, unfortunately, but the outlook is relatively optimistic. That quite a lot. So it's quite a close call there, actually, a lot closer than I would have thought. That the outlook is relatively optimistic. As Ashley said, some of these conversations, especially in the Middle East, we just would not have been having 5 years ago. The terminology wouldn't have been as familiar to a lot of us, and I'm sure that's not just the Middle East. That's going to be echoed worldwide as well. And we've talked about the need for better financial incentives, more maybe perhaps more thoughtful procurement practices when it comes to circular economy. All the progress that's going on in Europe, of course, is a fantastic template for others to learn from. There's so much happening there. Like I said, it really is in a league of its own. And of course, when we're looking at how NOCs are behaving, they've pushed ahead huge amounts, and maybe something to keep a real eye on is that end of life side of things and building that capacity now so that they're ready for later on with those huge growth numbers that Ashley mentioned, and then looking at the localization of resources like Katrina was saying as well. So we did cover quite a broad area in just I think we ended up having just over 30 minutes. So thank you, Katrina, thank you, Ashley, thank you, Cohen, for joining me, and I hope you found it interesting as well, and we hope to see you all again soon.
Many thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.